When Mark Essex was in the Navy, he said he wanted to become a dentist. 2 years later, he gunned down 19 people, including 10 police officers. 30 years before a pair of serial snipers terrorized Washington, D.C., Mark Essex prowled the streets of New Orleans with a .44 caliber Magnum rifle. During a week-long reign of terror, he launched a series of surprise attacks against the city's police department, its citizens, and its visitors. Essex's rampage ended in the bloodiest shootout in New Orleans history and the deadliest day ever for its police department. As the events of that day were broadcast live on television, 12-year-old John Allen Williams, who would later change his name to John Allen Muhammad and become one of the Beltway snipers, lived less than 70 miles away. New Year's Eve, 1972, fell on a Sunday. It was a busy night in New Orleans. Downtown, the French Quarter was packed with drunken revelers. Uptown, at Tulane Stadium, Oklahoma, was putting the finishing touches on their 14-0 Sugar Bowl thrashing of Penn State. Just before 11 p.m., 23-year-old Mark Essex parked his blue 1963 Chevrolet two-door in the 2800 block of Perdido Street, a block from New Orleans Police Department headquarters. He left the keys in the ignition. Central lockup, where prisoners are booked, fingerprinted, and photographed, was at the intersection of Perdido and South White Streets, on the ground floor of police headquarters. On New Year's Eve, Central Lockup was probably one of the best places in the city to find a crowd of policemen, especially at the 11 o'clock shift change. Essex crept down Perdido Street, sticking as much as possible to the shadows cast by the streetlights. As he passed the blue and white police cars parked haphazardly along the narrow street, he kept the rifle down by his leg. At the corner of Perdido and South White, Essex turned right. Ahead of him, the street was nothing more than a dead-end dirt road. It ran southwest for a half block until it butted up against a triple set of railroad tracks, a chain-link fence, and the I-10 expressway. The main entrance into lockup was a sallyport gate, a thick wire mesh grille that rolled up into the ceiling of the first floor like a garage door. The gate faced Perdido. Directly across from the sallyport was a vacant lot, which the police used for parking. After strolling along South White for about 100 feet, Essex angled into the dark vacant lot across from Central Lockup. The cars parked at the edge of Perdido Street provided good cover and concealment. Just short of 100 yards from the sallyport gate, and with a clear line of sight, Essex hunkered down in the grass and swung his .44 carbine out in front of him into a firing position. Across Perdido Street, it was the middle of shift change. Several cops were milling around just inside the sallyport. Alfred Harrell, a 19-year-old unarmed police cadet, sat in the glass-enclosed gatehouse. It was his job to open the sallyport and let in police cars carrying prisoners. Harrell had 5 minutes left of his shift. He had less than that left of his life. Lieutenants Kenneth Dupaquet and Horace Perez were in the middle of the sallyport. Dupaquet was just coming on as commander of the third watch, relieving Perez, who commanded the second watch. Cadet Bruce Weatherford, another 19-year-old waiting to be old enough to enter the police academy, had just parked his car and was walking across Perdido toward the main gate. He was scheduled to relieve Cadet Harrell in the gatehouse. Just minutes before 11 o'clock, Essex started firing into the sallyport gate. The sonic boom of his .44 Magnum crashed against the headquarters complex and shook its windows a fraction of a second after his bullet cracked past Weatherford's head. The heavy recoil of the carbine rattled Essex and kicked up dust in front of the muzzle. After a second or two, Essex reacquired his target, Cadet Weatherford, and fired again. Weatherford probably thought the first couple of shots were just loud firecrackers. It was only 1 hour before the new year, but then he saw cement chips flying off of the building in front of him. Weatherford ran through the main gate toward the doorway that led into the booking area. The 2 police lieutenants started moving that way too. Once Cadet Harrell realized they were under attack, he sprang out of the gatehouse and dashed across the sallyport toward the door to the booking room. Essex's 3rd or 4th shot punched right through Harrell's chest and ripped open his heart. The bullet ricocheted off of something inside the cement sallyport and hit Lieutenant Perez in the ankle, toppling him to the ground. Essex's Ruger carbine held only 5 shots. After firing 4 of them, he sprang to his feet and scrambled further back into the darkness of the vacant lot, in the direction of the expressway. He dropped his Colt .38 revolver, probably without realizing it, and left it behind. After covering nearly 200 feet of open ground, Essex turned, reloaded, and fired the powerful Ruger twice more. This time he missed. Cadet Harrell was dead on arrival at Charity Hospital. After firing his 6th and final shot at Central Lockup, Essex fled toward the expressway. He set off a string of firecrackers to cover his escape. The first set of train tracks were about 50 feet from where he'd let loose his 2nd burst of gunfire. At the tracks, Essex must have stumbled because he dropped his gas mask and some unfired Winchester .44 caliber Magnum cartridges. Just past the 3rd set of tracks, Essex hit the chain-link fence that ran beside the expressway. He scaled the fence, then ran through some soft earth, leaving a trail of boot prints on both sides of the interstate as he sprinted across it. He also dropped a couple more live rounds of ammo on the far side of the expressway. Beyond the expressway lay Gerttown, a neighborhood seething with crime, and one notoriously hostile to the police. By clambering over the railroad tracks, climbing the fence, and running across the interstate, Essex all but eliminated the threat of pursuit, and Gerttown was a place where he could disappear. Practically no one was going to report a black man running from the police. Essex couldn't have picked a better escape route, if escape was his intention. Within minutes of crossing the expressway, Essex tried to break into a warehouse at the corner of Euphrosyne Street and South Gayoso. He fired 3 blasts from his .44 Magnum into the lock of a door facing Gayoso, but the lock held firm. Directly across the street stood the Burkhart Building, a sprawling single-story warehouse and manufacturing plant. Essex hustled across the street. At the front corner of the building was a heavy wooden door that led to the business office. Beside the door was a window. Essex smashed the glass out with the butt of his rifle and climbed through the broken window. The building was wired with a monitored alarm system. As soon as they received the signal for a perimeter breach, the alarm company notified the police department of a possible break-in. Mark James Robert Essex grew up in Emporia, Kansas. As a black family, the Essexes were a distinct minority. Of Emporia's 28,000 residents, less than 2% were black. Yet Emporia was certainly no hotbed of racism, nor had it ever been known as a breeding ground for black militantism. Essex didn't come from poverty or a broken home. His parents were decent, hard-working religious people. His father served in the army during World War II. He was a mediocre student and showed no signs of the deep-seated hatred or rage that later consumed him. Friends and family have described his childhood as fairly typical and fairly happy. Essex was a Cub Scout. He liked to fish and hunt. During high school, he worked part-time as a mechanic. After graduation, he enrolled at Kansas State College, but left after just 1 semester. The year 1968 offered Essex, a healthy 19-year-old man from a working-class family, basically 2 things to look forward to: the draft and Vietnam. So, in January 1969, Essex signed up for a 4-year hitch in the US Navy. After boot camp, He went to dental technician school and landed a cush assignment at Imperial Beach Naval Air Station in San Diego. Things could have been much worse for the young Navy dental tech. While he worked 9 to 5 scraping teeth clean and spent weekends guzzling beer in Mexico, many of his contemporaries were slogging through the Vietnamese jungle or pushing patrol boats up the Mekong River. The Navy assigned Essex to work with Lieutenant Robert Hatcher, a young Navy dentist. Although their race, background and education were vastly different, the two men hit it off from the start. San Diego, the 1960s becoming the 1970s, far from the war, a beautiful beach drenched in sunlight. They combined to create an almost idyllic setting, one that would have made many young single men happy, but not Mark Essex. Soon after he arrived at Imperial Beach, he started complaining. He claimed to be the victim of the Navy's institutionalized racial discrimination, bigotry, and harassment. He got into fights with white sailors, and on several occasions received disciplinary action. Essex became interested in the Black Panther Party, a militant group that advocated armed revolution to effect social change. He also befriended a fellow sailor, a black man, who, like Essex, felt the Navy had disenfranchised him. The sailor was from New Orleans. Before he joined the Navy, Essex's new friend, a black Muslim convert, racked up a string of arrests in New Orleans, including robbery, rape, and theft. Essex's friend didn't do much better following the rules in the Navy than he had following the laws in New Orleans. He was a troublemaker. Lieutenant Hatcher noticed that Essex's personality and attitude changed after he met his new friend. It seemed to come in a matter of weeks, Hatcher said. Apparently fed up with the Navy after less than 2 years, Essex went AWOL, absent without leave, for a month at the end of 1970. During his unauthorized time off, he went home to Emporia. In January 1971, the Navy court-martialed Essex. He took the stand in his own defense. Essex testified, "I had begun to hate all white people." He also said that when he got out of the Navy, he wanted to become a dentist. Following his court-martial conviction, the Navy decided they didn't need Essex anymore. They discharged him in February 1971. Essex had served just half of his 4-year commitment. With the Navy behind him, the ex-sailor struck out for New York City. Essex spent about 3 months in New York, where he immersed himself in the culture of hatred and violence promoted by the Black Panther Party. The party's publications taught tactics for urban guerrilla warfare, referred to police officers as pigs, suggested the best weapons for the urban guerrilla. One of their recommendations was the .44 Magnum carbine, and stressed headshots for quick kills. After his stay in New York, Essex went back to Emporia, but couldn't readjust to small-town life. He had a string of jobs, most of which he lost because of his bad attitude. He also bought a couple of guns, a Colt .38 caliber revolver and a Ruger Model 44, a .44 caliber semi-automatic carbine rifle. After a little more than a year back in his hometown, Essex picked up the telephone and called his old Navy buddy from New Orleans. His friend's naval career had also been cut short. He had been booted out after suffering a string of bad luck that put him at odds with his commanders: possession of marijuana in the barracks, insubordination, failure to meet the Navy's grooming standards, and 2 periods of being absent without leave. Essex's friend was back home in New Orleans, where he'd joined a black Muslim mosque. Essex told his friend that he was leaving Kansas for good and was headed south. In August 1972, Mark Essex packed up his hatred, his rage, and his guns and took them to New Orleans. At about 11:10 p.m. on New Year's Eve, a K-9 unit, Car 270, with officers Edwin Hosley and Kenneth Blappert, along with Hosley's German Shepherd, King, pulled away from the chaotic shooting scene at Central Lockup and rolled toward the alarm call across the expressway at the Burkhardt building. Neither officer imagined the routine alarm call had any connection to the attack at police headquarters. At 11:15, Hosley, a 10-year veteran of the department, turned down the narrow section of South Gayoso that dead-ended between the Burkhart building and the warehouse across the street. He turned the car around and stopped his cruiser approximately 30 feet from the door to the Burkhart business office. The driver's side of his police car faced the Burkhart building. Crouched inside the business office, Mark Essex waited with the muzzle of his Magnum carbine resting on the ledge of the busted window. As Officer Hosley stepped out of his patrol car and turned to let his dog out, Essex shot him in the back. The distance of the shot was 37 feet, less than 12.5 yards. Hosley crumpled next to the rear tire. His partner dove across the seat to check on him as bullets shattered the windshield. Blappert snatched up the radio microphone. 270 to headquarters. Shots fired. Officer down. Euphroscene at South Gayoso. As another shot thundered over the roof of the patrol car, Blappert spotted the gunman's firing position and snapped off 4 shots from his .38 revolver. Then he dragged his partner's bloody body into the relative protection of the front seat of their patrol car. By the time backup cars arrived at the warehouse, the shootout was over. A swarm of police officers surrounded the Burkhart building and used shotguns to blast open the office door. They sent in 2 dogs. Then, after giving the dogs a couple of minutes to locate the shooter, the enraged officers flooded into the building. They wanted blood. Inside the dark manufacturing plant and warehouse, they found blood, but no suspect. For the second time in less than an hour, the sniper had escaped. Officer Edwin Hosley never recovered from his wound. He died in the hospital 2 months later. During a search of the Burkhart building, police found several spent .44 caliber shells inside the office. Scattered throughout the building were fresh drops of blood. There were also several bloody handprints. The cops theorized that the shooter had either cut himself on the broken window when he climbed into the office, or Officer Blappert had shot him. In the warehouse, the police found a tan corduroy shirt, a screw-on filter canister for a gas mask, a bag of 50 .38 caliber rounds of ammunition, a pair of clothwork gloves, and a flashlight. They also discovered how the shooter had escaped. On the side of the building opposite where the shootout had occurred, the police noticed a blood-smeared open window. Just outside the window, they found 3 unfired .44 Magnum cartridges. The ammunition outside the window was the start of a trail of bullets. By the end of that Monday morning, January 1st, the police picked up a total of 10 unfired cartridges. The path led straight into the heart of Gerttown. As they followed the track of .44 caliber bullets, several police officers and detectives began to suspect that the shooter had not dropped the ammunition accidentally. Many believed that the bullets had not been dropped at all, but had been laid down so that the police could find them and follow them. The trail of .44 cartridges led about 6 blocks to 1208 South Lopez Street, an old wood-framed house which had been converted into the first new St. Mark Baptist Church. A hand-printed cardboard sign taped to the door announced "Chicken dinners every Sunday." Writer Peter Hernon quotes Detective Emmett Dupass, who said, "It was clear that it was a trap, that we were being set up. The bullets were always in pairs and always pointed in the same direction." In describing the way the bullets were left, one detective says, "They were placed there. I think he was waiting for us in the church." As they huddled outside in the cold air and planned how best to enter the church to search for the elusive sniper, the policeman got an unexpected radio call from headquarters. The dispatcher advised them that Chief of Police Clarence Giaroso had called off the search. Throughout the morning, the chief received several complaints from Gerttown residents about the tactics the police were using to search for the killer. Doors had been kicked open and houses searched. The chief feared the officers would further alienate the already antagonistic neighborhood. Outside the church, the police officers fumed. According to Hernon, some of them considered storming the church anyway, despite the direct order from the chief to terminate the search. But cooler heads prevailed, and the policemen did as they were told. They went back to headquarters. Had they not been ordered to pull back, or had they decided to disobey the chief's order, it is very likely that the police would have found Mark Essex waiting for them inside the church. At about 6 p.m. January 1st, 9 hours after Chief Giaroso pulled his police officers out of Gurt Town, Sylvester Williams, the pastor of St. Mark Baptist Church, found the front door ajar. He crept inside and saw a young black man standing at the back of the church. The pastor ran to a neighbor's house and called the police. Minutes later, half a dozen New Orleans police officers fanned out around the small church. They searched the building and the grounds, but the man was gone. On Tuesday, January 2nd, at around 6 p.m., Essex strolled into Joe's grocery store at the corner of Irato Street and South Gayoso. The grocery store was 3 blocks from the church on South Lopez. Essex had a bloody bandage covering his left hand. The owner, Joseph Perniciaro, had heard on the news that law enforcement authorities were looking for a suspect in the rash of police shootings who might have an injured hand. Essex bought a chic razor and asked for lipstick and makeup. Joe's grocery didn't carry cosmetics. Essex paid for the razor with a $20 bill and left. An hour later, Perniciaro and his 14-year-old stockboy went to police headquarters and told detectives about the man. They described him as average size and said he wore army clothes and a safari jacket. The man had kept his bandaged left hand in his pocket almost the entire time. Perniciaro said he had been worried the man was going to rob him. The stockboy told detectives that after the man left, he'd seen him walking down Gayoso in the direction of Clio Street. From Clio, it was just 2 blocks to the church on South Lopez. The next day, Wednesday, January 3rd, the police got another tip about their suspect. At 7:30 p.m., a woman called the police department and said that the shooter they were looking for was hiding inside a church on South Lopez Street. Detectives raced back into Gurt Town and searched the church. On the walls and on the floor they found bloodstains. Inside the bathroom they discovered a bag filled with .38 caliber cartridges. Near the altar they found a note, later proven to have been written by Mark Essex, which apologized to the pastor for breaking into his church. But again the sniper was gone. On Sunday, January 7th at 10:15 that morning, Mark Essex entered Joe's grocery store again. This time he didn't stroll in. This time he stormed in. Essex wasn't looking for a razor blade, lipstick or makeup. He was looking for revenge. In his hands he carried his Ruger carbine. Joe Perniciaro was in the back of the small store. He looked up at Essex and recognized him right away. Essex jabbed the muzzle of his rifle in the grocer's direction. You're the one I want. Come here. Perniciaro turned to run, and Essex shot him. The semi-automatic rifle kicked out the spent shell, a Winchester Western .44 Magnum. It landed on top of a nearby cooler. Essex bolted from the store. He cut through a yard, hopped a low fence, then darted across a footbridge that spanned the Melpomene Canal. When the police arrived at the grocery store, they found Joseph Perniciaro bleeding badly but conscious. The heavy slug had torn apart his right shoulder. The floor was slick with his blood. He shot me because I talked to the police, Perniciaro said. I told you all not to come around here. During the preceding days, Chief Giaroso sent detectives from his intelligence division into Gurt Town. They'd been asking questions about the suspect's visit to the grocery store. According to one former detective, word could have easily gotten back to Essex in the all-black neighborhood that the white grocery store owner had been talking to the police. The first person he went after was the grocer, the former detective says, and he popped him. Moments after fleeing the store, Essex found 30-year-old Marvin Albert sitting in his 1968 Chevrolet Chevelle. Albert was parked in front of his house at 1506 South White Street. The car engine was running. Albert's house was just 4 blocks from Joe's grocery. Essex shoved the muzzle of his rifle through the open car window and into Albert's face. "Brother, get out of the car." Albert served a hitch in Vietnam. He'd seen guns before. He didn't move. "Are you crazy?" he said. "I don't want to kill you," Essex said. "I'm just killing honkies today, but I will kill you too." Realizing the gunman was dead serious, Albert climbed out of his car, then Essex slid behind the wheel and took off. Albert ran inside and called the police. 2 minutes later, a police car showed up, and Albert jumped into the front seat beside Officer Phil Dominic. They cruised the area, and within minutes, Albert spotted his car flying down Broad Street in the opposite direction. Before Officer Dominic could fight through the traffic to get his police car turned around, Essex and Marvin Albert's Chevy disappeared. As he raced through the uptown streets, Essex bounced Marvin Albert's black over tan Chevelle off of another car on Washington Avenue. The woman driving the other car scribbled down the license plate number as Essex accelerated away from the accident scene. The downtown Howard Johnson's Hotel was at 330 Loyola Avenue. The building was a functional 17-story elongated rectangle built during the mid-1960s. The long front of the hotel faced Loyola Avenue, a 4-lane boulevard separated by a wide, grassy median. The ground floor of the hotel contained the lobby, the reservation desk, a restaurant and bar, and the hotel business office. The 2nd through 7th floors served as the hotel parking garage. The 8th through the 18th floors housed the guest rooms. There wasn't a 13th floor. On the 8th floor, a pool deck and patio extended from the back of the building. The hotel was bordered on either end by Gravier and Perdido streets, and on the back by South Rampart. Directly across Loyola from the hotel was a Duncan Plaza, a grassy park dotted with oak trees. Surrounding Duncan Plaza was a government office complex, which included City Hall, the Louisiana Supreme Court, a state office building, and the main branch of the New Orleans Public Library. Essex careened into the Howard Johnson's parking garage in the stolen Chevelle. He dumped the car on the 4th floor. The hotel had a stairwell on either end of the building, one on the Gravier side and one on the Perdido side. The elevators were along the back wall. After dumping the car, Essex, rifle in hand, ran into the Gravier side stairwell. He climbed to the 8th floor and tried to open the steel fire door, but found it locked. The fire doors could only be opened from inside the hallway. The guest floors were built around a central hallway that ran the length of the building. There were 30 rooms on each floor. Set into each fire door was a steel-reinforced glass window. Essex looked through the window and saw a couple of housekeeping maids. He banged on the glass to get their attention and asked them to open the door for him. They refused. On the 9th floor, Essex again stood outside the fire door and got the attention of a maid. She also refused his demands to let him into the hotel. Essex continued to climb. He found the door to the 18th floor wedged open. A police investigation later found that the maids sometimes jammed a piece of linen or a hand towel into the locks so that they could get back onto the floor after visiting other housekeepers on different levels. When Essex burst out of the Gravier stairwell into the 18th floor hallway, he startled 3 black housekeepers. As he ran past them, Essex told the hotel workers not to worry. He said he was only after white people. In the hallway in front of room 1829, Essex found 27-year-old Dr. Robert Stiegel and his wife Betty. It was the last day of the Stiegels' New Orleans vacation, and they were moments away from checking out of the hotel. Dr. Stiegel tried to stop the man he saw running down the hallway, clutching a rifle. The 2 men struggled briefly, then Essex shot the doctor in the chest. As Mrs. Stiegel dropped to the floor and wrapped her arms around her husband, Essex pushed the muzzle of his .44 carbine against the back of her head and fired. Essex slipped into the Stiegels' room and snatched the telephone book from the nightstand. He doused it with lighter fluid, set it on fire, then tossed it under the window drapes. As he scuttled into the hallway and past the blood-soaked bodies of the Steagles, Essex dropped a red, green and black African flag onto the floor beside them. Within minutes, room 1829 was an inferno. Essex ran down the stairwell to the 11th floor. This time he didn't knock on the fire door. He just shot the lock off. He strode down the hallway, ducking in and out of empty rooms and lighting fires. Calls started coming into the hotel switchboard about a man with a gun wandering the hotel and shooting guests. Frank Schneider, the hotel assistant manager, rode the elevator up to the 11th floor to investigate. As soon as Schneider stepped off the elevator, he spotted the big gun in Essex's hands and bolted for the Perdido stairwell. Essex raised his rifle to his shoulder, took aim, and squeezed the trigger. The .44 Magnum bullet hit the assistant manager in the back of the head. His body fell just short of the fire door at the end of the hall. Essex walked down to the 10th floor. Outside the hotel, a crowd started to gather. Plumes of smoke poured from several of the upper floor windows. Walter Collins, the hotel general manager, started climbing the graveyard stairwell. The switchboard had received more reports of a man with a gun. The 8th and 9th floors were filled with smoke. When Collins reached the 10th floor, he spotted someone through the fire door window. He opened the door with a passkey. As Collins stepped into the hallway, Essex shot him. Mr. Collins died from his wound 3 weeks later in the hospital. Someone called the fire department. A few minutes later, policemen and firemen were on the way. The first 2 police officers on the scene walked into the lobby a few minutes before 11 o'clock. They soon heard about a man running loose inside the hotel with a gun. He was shooting people and setting fires. The officers piled into an elevator. As they rode up, they stopped on each of the guest floors and scanned the hallway looking for the gunman. On the 18th floor, the elevator shut down. The lights went off and the doors wouldn't open. Smoke started filling the elevator car. The emergency telephone didn't work. The power had gone out at the Howard Johnsons. Essex took the stairs down to the 8th floor pool and patio area. He saw hotel guest Robert Beamish standing near the pool and shot him in the stomach. Beamish fell into the pool, where he floated for more than 2 hours before being rescued. Beamish survived the shooting. Essex started lighting fires on the 8th floor. When he looked over the balcony of one of the rooms, down toward Loyola, he spotted a heavily laden fireman climbing a ladder toward the 9th floor. The fire department had set up an engine and a ladder truck on Loyola Avenue in front of the hotel. Fire Lieutenant Tim Ursin was clawing his way up the ladder under the weight of an air bottle and a roll of fire hose. 2 policemen were following him. Knowing there was a gunman loose in the hotel, Officers Bill Trapanier and Jack Ewell had decided to try to seize the high ground. Armed with shotguns, they scrambled up the ladder behind Ursin. The 2 policemen wanted to make their entry into the building as high as the ladder truck would allow. Essex pushed his rifle over the edge of the balcony and shot Tim Ursin. The bullet blew the fireman's left forearm apart. I looked at my raincoat and blood was pouring out of the left sleeve, Ursin said later. Trepanier was only a few feet below Ursin. When he was hit, I was looking up and the blood all came down, the policeman later told a reporter. I had blood all over my face and everything else. Trapanier braced his feet against the ladder and started blasting his pump-action shotgun at the gunman. Jack Ewell climbed past Trapanier and grabbed hold of Ursin and helped him down the ladder. Policemen dragged Ursin behind one of the trucks and took a look at his wound. According to Peter Hernan, one of the policemen later said it looked like someone had slammed him in the arm with a pickaxe. Ursin survived but lost most of his left arm. As more police officers flooded the area around the Howard Johnsons, many fanned out into nearby high-rise buildings to get a better angle of fire on the shooter. They carried with them a variety of weapons, many of them personally owned. There were shotguns, carbines, hunting rifles, even a couple of elephant guns. But the vast majority of the police officers carried only their .38 caliber service revolvers. It was before the age of SWAT, and the New Orleans Police Department was not at all prepared for what was happening. Essex stayed on the 8th floor, firing down onto Loyola Avenue, crowded with policemen, firemen, and spectators, and into the nearby buildings from where policemen had started to shoot at him. Some of the spectators cheered every time Essex fired. Officers Ken Solis and David McCann had been sitting in car 802 about 7 blocks away from the hotel when they heard on their police radio that Phil Dominic was chasing a stolen car. They were hoping the car would come their way. A few minutes after Dominic reported that he'd lost sight of the stolen car, Solis and McCann heard the dispatcher say the downtown Howard Johnson's was on fire. Then the dispatcher said officers were being shot at outside the hotel. Solis and McCann parked their car at the intersection of Loyola and Perdido to block traffic from crossing in front of the Howard Johnsons. Columns of smoke rose from the windows of the hotel, and gunfire crackled through the air. The two officers tried to push a crowd of spectators away from the street and into the relative safety of Duncan Plaza. From one of the 8th floor balconies, Essex spotted the two officers across the street in the open plaza. He took aim at Ken Solis and fired. From nearly 150 feet away, firing down at an angle of more than a 30-degree, Essex hit the policeman in the back of his right shoulder. "It felt like somebody hit me with a 2x4 across my back," Solis says. "A little bit more, and it would have taken me out, but luckily it just blew my arm apart." Dave McCann, who'd served a year in Vietnam as a Marine Corps medic, dragged his partner behind an oak tree and tried to stop the bleeding. Essex fired at the two officers again, but missed, his bullet kicking up only a clod of dirt beside the tree. Sergeant Emmanuel Palmisano was crouched behind his parked cruiser on Loyola when he saw Ken Solis go down. Palmisano broke out from behind his police car and sprinted towards Solis and McCann. From his position on the balcony, Essex fired at the sergeant as he dashed toward Duncan Plaza. The bullet shattered Palmisano's left arm and ripped into his back, but he survived. Officer Philip Coleman and his partner were in their patrol car on Loyola at Gravia when Solis and Palmisano were shot. Coleman drove down Loyola and ploughed his police car through Duncan Plaza until he pulled to a stop beside the tree that Solis and McCann had taken cover behind. In an incredible demonstration of marksmanship, Essex shot Coleman in the head as he stepped out of his car to help his fellow officers. The policeman died on the spot. Police gunfire from the ground and from the surrounding buildings finally drove Essex from the 8th floor. After an unsuccessful attempt to get back to the stolen car he ditched on the 4th floor of the parking garage, Essex climbed to the 16th floor. He lit several more fires and continued crawling out onto balconies and firing down at Loyola Avenue. He wounded an ambulance driver, a civil defense fire chief who'd shown up to see if he could help, and killed Officer Paul Persigo with a shot to the head. For some reason, Chief of Police Clarence Giarosso decided to set up his command post in the lobby of the Howard Johnsons. To get to or from the command post meant running through a gauntlet of police and sniper gunfire. Although setting up the command post inside the hotel with the sniper didn't make any sense, one possible explanation is that, as a former Marine, Giarosso wanted to be as close to the action as possible. As soon as he ran through the storm of gunfire and arrived inside the command post, 48-year-old Deputy Chief of Police Louis Sergo found out there were at least 2 officers trapped in an elevator somewhere near the top of the hotel. He grabbed a shotgun and a portable radio and threw together a rescue team of 5 volunteers. Then the Deputy Chief led them up the dark, smoke-filled Perdido stairwell toward the roof. On the roof, above each stairwell, stood a cinder-block cubicle. The cubicles, one on each end of the building, were about 20 feet wide and about 10 feet deep, A metal door that accessed the stairwell was mounted in the center of each cubicle. On each side of the door was a covered alcove about 5 feet wide. The alcoves were surrounded on 3 sides by cinder block walls. The open sides, along with the stairwell doors, faced the center of the roof. Between the 2 cubicles, sitting atop the elevator shafts and flush with the back wall of the building, was a cinder block structure about twice the size of one of the cubicles. The structure housed 2 adjacent workplaces, a boiler room and an elevator maintenance room. Essex climbed the Perdido stairwell to the roof, but found the door chained and locked. He shot the lock but couldn't get the door open. On his way back down the stairs, he heard voices coming from below. It was Deputy Chief Sergo's rescue team. Essex stopped on the 16th floor and waited for them. When the first man coming up the stairs reached the landing between the 15th and 16th floors, Essex was above and behind him. He aimed his rifle through the darkness and fired. The bullet hit Deputy Chief Sergo in the back and blew out a chunk of his spine. The wound was fatal. One of Sergo's men raised his shotgun and fired 3 blasts up the stairwell, but Essex was already gone. He had opened the door and slipped into the 16th floor hallway. Essex scampered to the other side of the building and entered the gravier stairwell. He again climbed to the roof, but this time the door at the top of the stairs was unlocked. It was 1 p.m. After Deputy Chief Sergo's death, the situation inside the command post was out of control. Although the police had no idea how many snipers there were, most of them agreed that it was impossible for one person to have done so much damage. Some reports coming in put the number of shooters as high as 3. Police officers in nearby buildings reported seeing at least 2 shooters on the hotel roof. There was even a report that the gunman had taken several hostages. Scattered throughout the hotel were dead and wounded hotel guests and staff, and trapped firemen and police officers. 8th District Officer Antoine Sachs had worked undercover in the French Quarter until 4 or 5 o'clock Sunday morning. Around 10 a.m. his wife woke him up and told him there was a sniper at the Howard Johnsons. Sachs knew immediately that it was connected to the string of police shootings. His wife got hysterical when he started collecting his gear and told her he was going to the hotel. To calm her down, Sachs claimed to have changed his mind. He told her he wasn't going, then he tossed his weapons and equipment out through the bathroom window of their house. He sneaked outside and loaded it into his car and headed for the Howard Johnsons. With him he brought an M16 rifle and 1,000 rounds of ammunition. He thought that would be enough. He was wrong. Just after 1 o'clock, Chief Giarusso ordered another expedition up the 2 stairwells. The chief wanted the 2 teams to locate and isolate the snipers. If possible, he wanted his men to push the shooters up onto the roof, away from the guest rooms. The teams would search the hotel floor by floor. Lieutenant Jake Schnapp and 3 men started working their way up the Perdido stairwell. On the 11th floor, they stumbled over the body of assistant hotel manager Frank Schneider. Most of his head had been blown away. On the landing between the 15th and 16th floors, one of Schnapp's men, Officer Larry Arthur, picked up the shotgun Deputy Chief Sergo had dropped when he was shot. Arthur thought the extra firepower might come in handy when they reached the roof. At the top of the Perdido stairwell, Lieutenant Schnapp and his men found the same thing Essex had found, a chained and padlocked door. Larry Arthur hammered the door with his foot until the lock snapped open. Arthur threw the door open and rushed out onto the roof, Deputy Chief Sergo's shotgun thrust out in front of him. Mark Essex was there waiting. As soon as he saw the policeman burst through the door at the top of the Perdido stairwell, Essex threw his rifle to his shoulder and snapped off a shot. The bullet hit the cop in the gut and knocked him back through the door. Essex dashed into the concrete cubicle above the gravier stairwell. Larry Arthur got off 1 blast with Sergo's shotgun as he fell. Then he dropped the scattergun and clutched at the gaping wound in his stomach. The shotgun hit the floor and wedged between the jamb and the metal door as it swung shut. As two men helped Arthur limp down the stairs, they passed more cops headed to the roof. The chief had sent more men up to reinforce Snap's team. On the other end of the hotel, the Gravier team reported that they had also reached the roof. Finally, Giarrusso had something positive to show for all of the effort and sacrifice his officers had made. All of the floors of the hotel were secure. The shooter, or shooters, were contained on the roof. All of the trapped guests, staff, firemen, and policemen could be brought down to the comparative safety of the ground floor. The next step would be to secure the roof. To do that, the police were going to have to capture or kill whoever was up there. Outside the hotel, it was getting colder. It was also getting dark. Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Chuck Pittman had been watching the drama at the Howard Johnsons unfold on television all afternoon. The big New Orleans television stations had camera crews and reporters at the scene. Pittman was a helicopter pilot and the commander of the Marine Air Unit stationed across the Mississippi River, just south of New Orleans, near the town of Belle Chase. Pittman was recovering from a .50 caliber bullet wound he took in the leg in Vietnam, where he'd flown 1,200 combat missions and been shot down 7 times. Pittman and the U.S. Coast Guard commander had recently worked out a deal to assist local authorities with rescue efforts in case of a high-rise fire. Just a couple of months before, a fire at the Rolt Center across Gravier from the Howard Johnsons forced 4 women to jump to their deaths from the 15th floor. Although the Coast Guard had primary responsibility for air rescue because of their sophisticated equipment, Pittman had seen on television that there was a lot of gunfire in and around the hotel. So he sent 2 Marine sergeants armed with M14 rifles to fly with the Coast Guard. Their mission was to protect the Coast Guard helicopter, Pittman says. As the afternoon wore on, Pittman grew more anxious. He'd heard nothing back from the Coast Guard. I kept waiting to see the Coast Guard on TV, he says, but they didn't show up. By late afternoon, the 2 sergeants returned. Pittman asked what the Coast Guard plan was. They say they can't fly, one of the Marines reported. The weather is too bad. Pittman glanced outside. It was getting dark. The airfield was completely socked in by fog and low-hanging clouds. Visibility was terrible. Shit, he said. It's not too bad for me. I can fly up the river. Pittman ordered his operations officer to call the New Orleans Police Department and offer their assistance. An hour later, a desk sergeant called back. "If you've got a searchlight, come on down," he said. The visibility was so bad that Pittman couldn't just take off and fly straight to New Orleans. He had to air taxi toward downtown. Hovering just a few feet off the ground and creeping forward, Pittman took his twin-rotor Sea Knight helicopter out over the Mississippi River and turned left. "We were looking up at some of the ships in the channel," he says. The mile-long Greater New Orleans Bridge, which spans the Mississippi River, was shrouded in fog. When he reached it, Pittman saw car headlights crossing above him. Somehow he missed a string of high-tension wires near the bridge that he didn't even know were there. Pittman took a right at the bridge and followed the expressway into downtown. He set the Marine helicopter down in a parking lot between the under-construction Superdome and City Hall. While his crew, a co-pilot and 2 sergeants with M14s, waited, a police car drove Pittman to Loyola Avenue. Police vehicles were scattered everywhere. Gunshots were popping up and down the street. The fire trucks were sitting there pumping water, but all the firemen were inside so they wouldn't get shot, Pittman says. The policeman driving the car pointed to another police cruiser sitting in front of the hotel. "You see down there at the next block? The car with the door open?" "Yes," Pittman said. "That car has a radio in it that you can use to reach the chief." "Wait a minute," Pittman said. "You want me to walk down that street, with gunfire going overhead, the police hiding in every doorway, and get on a car radio?" The policeman nodded. Pittman walked down the street. He was afraid that if he ran, he'd attract a bullet. When he reached the second police car, he picked up the radio microphone and identified himself as the helicopter pilot. A voice on the radio told him to come into the command post. "Where's that?" Pittman asked. "In the hotel," the voice said. "You've got to be kidding me." Pittman strolled into the hotel, but the lobby was dark, lit only by a few feeble emergency lights. Many of the guests were jammed into a corner of the restaurant, just trying to keep warm. There were a lot of nervous people, Pittman says. Chief Giarrusso waved him over and said, "You're the guy with the armored helicopter, right?" "It's not really armored," Pittman explained. "It's got a little boilerplate over the engine." "What can you do for me then?" the chief said. But then, before the pilot could respond, Giarrusso snapped his fingers. "I know," he said. "I want you to pick up my armored car and put it down on the roof." The New Orleans Police Department had an old armored personnel carrier that weighed close to 16,000 pounds. Pittman explained that his Sea Knight could only lift about 5,000 pounds. "Well, what can you do?" Giarrusso said. Pittman told the chief that he could carry a load of police officers above the roof to see what was going on. "We'll try to root him out," he added. Giarrusso picked one officer to go as his communications man. Then he put out a radio call for volunteers with specialized weapons to go on a dangerous mission. Tom Casey, Frank Burris, and Antoine Sachs came into the command post and signed up. Since his arrival early that afternoon, Sachs had been across Gravier Street in the Rolt Center, the location of the deadly high-rise fire, 2 months before. He had found a position opposite the cubicle that sat on top of the Gravier stairwell. A solid cinder block wall shielded the sniper from Sachs's view, but he could hear the gunman shouting obscenities and firing his big gun. Sachs occasionally saw the sniper flick out still-burning cigarette butts. Less than 100 yards separated the two men. "I periodically would pepper the cubicle just to let him know somebody was close by," Sachs says. Eventually the sniper tossed a crumpled red and white cigarette pack onto the roof. "I shot the pack a couple of times and bounced it around on the rooftop," Sachs says. He was trying to send the sniper a message. He wasn't the only one who knew how to shoot. As soon as the chief explained the mission to the 4 policemen, Sachs, a 26-year-old former Marine, was disappointed. He thought he was volunteering to assault the roof. Before the briefing ended, Sachs asked the chief for permission to drop from the helicopter onto the rooftop. Giarrusso shook his head. He was adamant, "I'm not going to have any more cops killed today." As darkness closed in around them, Lieutenant Colonel Pittman led the heavily armed policemen to the helicopter. Pittman's crew had taken out the windows to prevent glass fragments from flying inside the aircraft, in case gunfire hit it. The doors were locked open so the policemen could shoot. Once they were airborne, the bone-chilling wind whipped through the helicopter, almost freezing the underdressed policemen. "It was so frigging cold, I didn't think I was going to be able to shoot," Sachs recalls. "I was shaking like a leaf." But when Pittman lifted them over the top of the Howard Johnsons, everything changed. "As soon as the crew chief tapped me on the head, it was like he threw a heating blanket on me," Sachs said. "I was ready. Reports from policemen in the surrounding buildings put the sniper inside the cubicle above the Gravier stairwell. Because of the wind, the rain, and the low clouds, Pittman had to make his approach from the south. He came thundering in below the tops of the buildings, then swept up over the roof of the Howard Johnsons. Once he was over the hotel, Pittman fixed his searchlight on the Gravier cubicle, but couldn't see anyone. Sachs and the other police sharpshooters figured the sniper was either hiding just inside the stairwell or in one of the 2 alcoves on either side of the door. They opened fire. During several passes over the cubicle, Sachs used his M16 to cut gaps in the cinder block walls. Although the policeman couldn't find the sniper, he didn't have any trouble finding them. Each time Pittman pulled away from the hotel, police officers in nearby buildings reported seeing the gunman run out of the cubicle and fire at the helicopter. When the policemen ran out of ammo, Pittman had to set the Sea Knight down so they could get more. They made a second flight over the roof at about 7:30 p.m. Essex fired at the helicopter as Pittman made his approach, but again he vanished as the aircraft roared over the roof. The policeman in the back of the helicopter continued to blast away at the cubicle. Soon they needed to land again for more ammunition. Sachs had burned through the 1,000 rounds he'd brought from his house. As Pittman dropped away from the hotel, the sniper again popped out of his hole and started shooting at them. It was obvious the helicopter was getting hit, Sachs says. You could feel the strikes. At 8:50 p.m., Pittman lifted off from behind City Hall for a third time. Reloaded, Sachs and the other officers were ready for another confrontation with the elusive sniper. On the approach to the hotel, the helicopter again took fire, but as they rose above the roof, the sniper had once more disappeared. Pittman hovered just over the rooftop and tried to hold his searchlight steady as the policeman fired into the Gravier Street cubicle. Essex was in the back of the alcove on the right-hand side of the Gravier stairwell. A metal water pipe ran up along the back wall of the alcove. Each time the helicopter passed overhead, Essex shimmied to the top of the pipe and clung there. As they looked down onto the top of the cubicle, the Marines and policemen inside the helicopter couldn't see him. It was an almost perfect hiding spot. As Sachs fired into the cubicle, trying to open even bigger holes in the cinder block walls, he noticed that the water pipe at the back of the alcove was shaking. He stopped firing and tapped Officer Tom Casey on the shoulder. When Casey looked over, Sachs shouted above the roar of the engines, "I think he's on the pipe." Casey nodded that he understood, and Sachs said, "Put some fire on his ass," to try to get him to drop. Sachs fired several rounds into the roof, just outside the alcove. He was trying to skip them high up along the back wall near the pipe. One of the shots from the helicopter hit the water pipe and shattered it, sending a torrent of water down on top of the policeman in the Gravier stairwell. In the cockpit of the helicopter, Pittman was aware that the policeman had discovered the sniper's hiding place. He eased the big helicopter away from the roof as if he were pulling out. It was a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. With the pipe under him split open and the helicopter again flying away, Essex dropped to the floor of the alcove and picked up his rifle. He charged out onto the roof to fire another couple of parting shots at the retreating aircraft. Then the searchlight hit him. After dropping away from the hotel, Pittman had reversed direction and slipped back over the building. He swept his searchlight across the roof. "I saw him come out of the dark," Pittman says. The gunman was caught out in the open, 30 feet from the Gravier cubicle. The sniper snapped his rifle up to his shoulder. Pittman saw a flash and a red-hot ball rocketing up toward him. The gunman's round slammed into the transmission housing just above the cockpit. Pittman knew the helicopter had been hit. He didn't know how badly or even how long they could stay in the air, but he held the big bird steady over the hotel as the policemen in the back adjusted their line of fire. They were 10 feet off the roof and less than 50 feet from the sniper. "We were looking eyeball to eyeball at him," Sachs says. With a fresh magazine in his M16, Sachs opened fire. "I just walked the bullets right into him." When Pittman's searchlight finally caught Essex out in the open, the elusive enemy that the police had been chasing for a week was finally exposed. Policemen who'd crouched for hours in open windows and on rooftops all around the Howard Johnsons started shooting. Mark Essex's body convulsed beneath the fusillade of police bullets and collapsed onto the roof. His Ruger .44 caliber Magnum carbine lay beside him, broken into pieces by the hail of gunfire. "He was hit a number of times," recalls Pittman, in a bit of understatement. An autopsy later revealed Essex had been struck by more than 200 bullets, Some even speculated police officers on the roof shot additional rounds at him up close out of spite, because it was almost impossible to hit him 200 times while standing. "The guy was so shot up he had to be picked up with a scooper," said Eddie Rance, who was perched on a nearby building armed with a .30 caliber carbine, and who took part in the volley of shots that finally brought Essex down. The standoff didn't end with the death of Mark Essex. Very few of the police officers involved in the siege of the downtown Howard Johnsons believed that there was just one sniper. Descriptions of the shooter provided by hotel guests and staff varied. Throughout the long cold night, tired and hungry police officers, stationed at the top of both stairwells and on the surrounding buildings, continued to hear and see what they believed were more gunmen. Chuck Pittman continued to fly sorties over the hotel, trying to draw fire from additional snipers. Policemen on board the helicopter saturated the roof with tear gas. On Monday afternoon, Chief Giaroso ordered an assault on the roof. Several policemen received minor injuries as they fired into the boiler and maintenance rooms. When they finally got inside, the police found both rooms empty. Spent Winchester .44 Magnum shell casings littered the hotel. Inside the Gravier cubicle, police found 18 empty casings. After detectives identified Essex's body, they searched his uptown apartment and discovered a shrine dedicated to his hatred. Every inch of wall space was covered with racist graffiti. The words hate and kill were repeated over and over. Among Essex's possessions were Muslim and Black Panther newspapers, along with a well-worn copy of the book Black Rage by Doctors William H. Grier and Price M. Cobbs. Detectives also found a New Orleans map with the locations of police headquarters and the downtown Howard Johnsons circled. During Essex's funeral, the New York office of the Black Panther Party sent a condolence note to his parents in Emporia, Kansas. The note hailed Mark Essex as a warrior and revolutionary. After the siege, New Orleans television station WWL turned over a handwritten note to the police that they'd received days before the attack at the Howard Johnsons. The police crime lab later proved that the note, dotted with misspellings and punctuation errors, had been written by Essex. The note said, "Africa greets you. On December 31st, 1972, approximately 11 p.m., the downtown New Orleans Police Department will be attacked. Reason? Many. But the death of 2 innocent brothers will be avenged. And many others. P.S. Tell Pig Giaruso the felony action squad ain't shit." All of the physical evidence and the official police report point to only one shooter, Mark James Robert Essex, a 23-year-old, ex-Navy man, and hate-filled racist. But to this day, some of the policemen who were there disagree. In 1998, Bill Trapanier, one of the policemen who rescued wounded fireman Tim Ersin, told the Times-Picayune newspaper, "My gut feeling is I shot at 2 different people." The police report on the investigation into Mark Essex and the Howard Johnson's shooting, which ran to more than 900 pages, concluded by saying, "What he intended to achieve will probably remain in the grave with him." What is certain is that Mark Essex was angry at the world, and he chose to vent that anger through the barrel of a gun.